The goat had a bell on its neck, and that was the only reason Wren could still hear it. She pushed through the tall grass at the edge of the fence line, her small boots sinking into soft mud left over from the morning rain. The settlement behind her was waking up slowly, smoke rising from a few chimneys, but out here the world felt quiet and open, like it belonged only to her. She was not supposed to be this far from home. Her father had told her many times that the land past the old fence was not safe, that strange things lived out there, things that had burned whole towns before the colony was even built. But the goat did not care about fences, and Wren could not let it wander off and get eaten by something worse than her father's warning. The bell rang again, fainter this time, pulling her toward a line of broken rocks that rose out of the ground like teeth. She climbed over them carefully, scraping her palm on the stone, and stopped when she saw what lay on the other side. It was not a hill. It was a crater, wide and deep, with scorched earth along its edges that had never fully grown back, even after all these years. Old metal, twisted and rusted, poked out of the dirt here and there, remains of something that must have crashed a long time ago. The goat stood near the bottom, chewing calmly on a patch of weeds, completely unbothered by the strange place it had found. Wren took a step down the slope, and then she saw it. At first she thought it was another pile of rock, dark and still, curled against the far wall of the crater. But rocks did not breathe. Rocks did not have wings folded along their backs like enormous leather sails, or scales that caught the morning light in dull shades of gray and green. Rocks did not have eyes. The eyes opened slowly, and they found her immediately. Wren's whole body went cold. She had heard the stories 100 times, the same way every child in the settlement had. The monster in the wasteland. The thing that had destroyed 3 outposts before anyone could build walls strong enough to stop it. The reason her people carried weapons, even to check on their crops. She had imagined it 100 different ways in her nightmares, but none of those imaginings had prepared her for how big it truly was, or how tired it looked. She should have run. Every instinct told her to turn and scramble back over the rocks, screaming for help. But her legs would not move, and somewhere underneath the fear was a strange, quiet thought. It has not moved either. The dragon watched her from across the crater, its great head low to the ground, wings pressed tightly against its body as if trying to take up less space. It did not roar. It did not lunge. It simply watched, the way an old animal watches a bird land nearby, wary but not hungry for a fight. Long seconds passed. The goat's bell rang once more as it shifted its weight, oblivious to the standoff happening a few feet away. Wren realized she was holding her breath and let it out slowly, watching the creature's chest rise and fall in the same rhythm as her own breathing had been a moment ago. "You're not attacking me," she said, before she could stop herself. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. The dragon's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in something closer to confusion, as if no one had spoken to it in a very long time, and it had almost forgotten what words were for. It did not answer. It only lowered its head another few inches, resting its chin against the dirt, and closed its eyes halfway, watching her through the slits without lifting a single claw. Wren did not know what made her do it, but she took another step down into the crater instead of running away. The goat trotted over and nudged her hand with its nose, wanting to be led home, and that small, ordinary feeling of the goat's rough fur against her palm was enough to steady her shaking hands. "I have to take him back," she said, nodding toward the goat, as if explaining herself to the enormous creature made any sense at all. "My dad will be angry if I don't." The dragon did not move as she backed slowly out of the crater, pulling the goat along by a loop of rope tied to its collar. It only watched, unmoving, until she reached the top of the rocks and glanced back one last time. In that final look, she thought she saw something she had never once imagined seeing on the face of a monster: loneliness. She did not tell anyone what she had seen. Not her father, not her mother, not even her best friend who lived 2 houses down and always wanted to know everything. She walked home with the goat trotting happily beside her, her heart still pounding, replaying the moment over and over in her mind. The stories had never mentioned that the monster's eyes looked sad. They had never mentioned that it stayed so still, so careful, as if it did not want to frighten her more than it already had. That night, lying in her bed while the settlement's lanterns dimmed one by one outside her window, Wren stared up at the ceiling and thought about the crater at the edge of the world. She thought about the way the dragon had folded its wings tightly, the way it had lowered its head instead of raising it, the way it had let her walk away without so much as a growl. Whatever that creature was, she decided, it was not the monster from the stories. Not entirely. And though she was only a child, and though every grown-up she knew would have told her she was wrong, she made up her mind that she wanted to know why. 3 days passed before Ren found the courage to go back. She spent that time doing ordinary things, feeding chickens, helping her mother sort dried vegetables, sitting through lessons at the small schoolhouse where an old teacher droned on about crop rotation. But her mind kept drifting back to the crater, to the way the dragon's chest had risen and fallen so evenly, like something trying very hard to seem calm. On the 4th morning, she packed a small cloth bag with 2 pieces of bread and a strip of dried meat she had saved from dinner. She told her mother she was going to look for eggs near the old barn, which was not exactly a lie, since she did pass by the barn on her way to the fence line. Nobody stopped her. Nobody suspected that a child so small could be walking toward the one place every adult in the settlement feared most. The crater looked the same as before, quiet and scarred, the twisted metal still poking out of the dirt like old bones. The dragon was there too, curled in the same spot, though this time its eyes opened the moment her foot touched the first loose stone at the crater's edge. It did not startle. It simply watched her climb down, the same wary stillness in its posture as before. "I brought you something," Ren said, holding up the cloth bag as if the dragon could somehow understand the gesture. She set it down a good distance away, not wanting to get too close, and stepped back to sit on a flat rock nearby. The dragon did not move for a long while. Then, slowly, carefully, it extended its long neck and sniffed at the bag before nudging it open with the very tip of its snout. It ate the bread first, gently, as if trying not to seem too eager, and then the meat, swallowing both in a single motion despite how small the offering must have seemed to a creature its size. "That's not enough for something as big as you," Ren said, almost apologetically. "I'll bring more next time." The dragon's head lifted, and for the first time, it made a sound, low and rumbling. Not quite a growl, but not quite anything Ren had a name for either. It was almost like a question. She decided to answer it as if it had been one. "My name is Ren," she said. "I live in the settlement, over the rocks. You probably already know that." Days turned into a routine after that. Ren would sneak away whenever she could, bringing small bits of food, sitting a little closer each time, telling the dragon about her day, her chores, the arguments her parents had about crop yields, the game she played with her friend down the road. The dragon never spoke, not in those early visits, but it listened. It always listened, its great head turned toward her, its eyes following her every movement with a patience she had never seen in anything so large and powerful. She noticed things about it the longer she watched. The way it shifted its wings away from her whenever she got close, as if making sure it could not accidentally hit her if it moved wrong. The way it kept its claws tucked beneath its body most of the time, never once extending them toward her, even when she was close enough that a single swipe could have ended everything. It was, she realized slowly, being careful, deliberately, constantly careful, the way someone might be careful holding something they were afraid of breaking. One afternoon, while she was describing a particularly unfair chore her father had given her, the dragon spoke. "Careless," it said. The word came out rough and slow, like something dragged up from a long-forgotten place, but it was clear enough to understand. Ren froze mid-sentence, staring at it with wide eyes. "You can talk." The dragon lowered its head slightly, as if the sound of its own voice surprised even itself. It did not answer right away, and when it finally did, the words came haltingly, each one carefully chosen. "Long time," it said. "Since talking. Why didn't you say anything before?" Ren asked, leaning forward. "Afraid," the dragon admitted, and something about the simplicity of that single word made Ren's chest tighten in a way she did not fully understand. A creature so enormous, so feared, admitting to being afraid of a child. Afraid of what? Me. The dragon's eyes softened, if such a thing were possible for a face built for destruction. "Afraid you leave. Like others." Ren did not know what to say to that. She thought about the stories again, the burned outposts, the fear that gripped her whole settlement whenever the dragon was mentioned, and wondered, not for the first time, how much of what she had been told was actually true. She wanted to ask, But something in the dragon's tired expression told her the answer would come with time, not with questions. Instead, she scooted a little closer, close enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating off its scales, and said, "I'm not going anywhere. Not yet, anyway. I have to get home before it gets dark, or my mom will worry." The dragon made that same low rumbling sound again, and this time Ren understood it perfectly. It was not a growl at all. It was something closer to relief. She left the crater that evening with her heart lighter than it had been in days, already planning what she would bring next time, already looking forward to the next conversation, however slow and halting it might be. She did not notice, as she climbed back over the rocks toward home, that someone from the settlement had spotted her from a distance, watching her walk away from the direction everyone knew to avoid. The transport ship landed just outside the settlement gates on a gray morning, kicking up dust that settled over the rooftops like a fine layer of ash. Its arrival drew a crowd almost instantly, farmers stepping away from half-finished chores, children pressed against fences to watch the ramp lower, and the tall figure of Bram step out, dressed in worn combat gear that had clearly seen better days. He was not a young man anymore, but he moved with the kind of steady confidence that came from decades of doing dangerous work and surviving it. Holt, the settlement's leader, met him at the gate with a firm handshake and a face that could not quite hide his relief. "Took you long enough," Holt said. "Command doesn't move fast for a rumor," Bram replied, glancing past him toward the fields beyond the settlement. "But 3 outposts destroyed in the same region, over the same years, all blamed on the same creature? That's not a rumor anymore. That's a pattern." Holt nodded grimly and led him inside, where a small group of settlement leaders had gathered to discuss what everyone had started calling the Tarn problem, though few of them had ever confirmed that name themselves. It had simply passed into legend so long ago that nobody questioned where it came from anymore. While the adults spoke in hushed, serious tones about weapons and strategy, Ren sat outside the meeting hall's window, straining to hear every word through the thin wooden walls. Her stomach twisted painfully with each mention of the dragon, each plan discussed for how to finally end what the settlement had feared for years. She thought about running to warn him immediately, but something held her back. If she disappeared right when the hunter arrived, questions would follow. She needed to be careful, the same way the dragon had always been careful with her. That evening, she found Dana, the settlement's quiet scientist, sitting alone in the small records room, surrounded by stacks of old reports and faded photographs. Dana had always been kind to her, patient in a way most of the busy adults were not, and Ren had a feeling that if anyone in the settlement might listen to reason, it would be her. "Can I ask you something?" Ren said, stepping into the doorway. Dana looked up from her papers, offering a tired smile. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "The stories about the dragon," Ren said carefully. "Are you sure they're all true?" Dana's expression shifted, something thoughtful crossing her face. She gestured for Ren to sit, and after a moment of hesitation, pulled one of the old reports toward her. "Funny you should ask that. I've been going through these old records for weeks, ever since Command asked us to compile everything before sending Bram out here. And some of it doesn't add up." She showed Ren a faded photograph of a burned outpost, the edges curling with age. This attack, the one that started most of the fear, happened almost 40 years ago. The survivors described something large and dark attacking their walls. "But look here." She pointed to a small note scrawled at the bottom of the page. "There's a mention of a second creature, smaller, faster, that was seen fleeing the scene before help arrived. Nobody ever followed up on it. Everyone just assumed it was the same monster the stories already blamed." Ren's heart pounded. So maybe it wasn't him? Maybe it was something else, and everyone just blamed the biggest, scariest thing they could think of? "It's possible," Dana admitted. "I don't have proof yet. But something about this whole situation has never felt complete to me. Why does a creature capable of destroying an entire outpost never show itself directly to any of our patrols? Why does it stay so far from the settlement, year after year, when it could have attacked us 100 times over by now if it wanted to?" Ren wanted so badly to tell her the truth, to explain about the crater, the conversations, the way the dragon flinched away from getting too close as though terrified of hurting her by accident. But the words caught in her throat. If she told Dana everything, Dana would have to tell Holt, and Holt would tell Bram. And then the hunter with his tired, confident eyes would know exactly where to find him. I just don't think he's what everyone says he is, Ren said instead, choosing her words carefully. That's all. Dana studied her for a long moment, an expression on her face that made Ren wonder if she suspected more than she was letting on. But she only nodded slowly. I hope you're right. But hope isn't going to stop Bram from doing his job, not without real evidence. And even then, people believe what they've always believed. It takes a lot to change that. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ren slipped out of her house and made her way toward the crater under the cover of darkness, moving faster and more carelessly than she ever had before. She found the dragon awake, as if it somehow already sensed something had changed. They sent someone, she said breathlessly, sliding down the rocky slope. A hunter. He's here to find you. The dragon's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Ren saw something like real fear pass through them. Not fear of the hunter, she realized slowly, watching the way its gaze moved toward the direction of the settlement, toward her. You must not come again, it said quietly, its voice heavier than she had ever heard it. Too dangerous now. I'm not leaving you, Ren said stubbornly, crossing her arms even as her voice trembled. Not when they don't even know the truth. The dragon lowered its head until it was almost level with her, close enough that she could see her own small reflection in its dark eyes. Truth does not always save, it said. Please, Ren, stay away. But even as it said the words, she could see it did not truly believe she would listen. And deep down, neither did she. Holt found the muddy footprints leading toward the fence line early the next morning, small ones, clearly belonging to a child, mixed in with drag marks that could only have come from something enormous. His stomach dropped the instant he recognized the size of Ren's boots pressed into the dirt near his own front step. He confronted her the moment she walked through the door that afternoon, her cheeks flushed from running, a guilty look already forming before he had said a single word. Where have you been going? He asked, his voice low and controlled in the way it only got when he was trying very hard not to panic. Ren considered lying, considered inventing another excuse about eggs or goats, but the weight of everything she had been carrying alone for weeks finally became too much to hold by herself any longer. So she told him the truth. All of it. The crater, the first meeting, the food she had brought, the slow, halting conversations, the way the dragon had begged her just last night to stay away for her own safety. Holt listened in stunned silence, his face shifting through disbelief, fear, and something that looked almost like grief by the time she finished. You've been alone with that creature for weeks, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you understand what could have happened to you? Nothing happened, Ren said firmly. He's never hurt me. Not once. He's careful, Dad. He's careful with everything. Even the way he moves, so he doesn't accidentally step near me too fast. That doesn't matter, Holt said, though his voice wavered slightly on the words. You don't know what that thing is capable of. Nobody does. That's exactly why it's dangerous. Word spread through the settlement faster than Ren could have imagined, moving from house to house until it seemed like everyone knew by nightfall. Some reacted with panic, insisting the settlement pack up and move somewhere safer immediately. Others, harder and more frightened, sided quickly with Bram's original plan, arguing that the child's safety only proved how urgently the creature needed to be dealt with before something worse happened. Dana tried to speak up during the emergency meeting called that evening, laying out everything she had found in the old records, the inconsistencies, the unexplained second creature from the earliest attack, the pattern of destruction that never quite lined up with a single culprit acting alone for 40 years. But fear, once it took hold of a room full of frightened people, was not easily reasoned with. With respect, Bram said, standing at the front of the hall, arms crossed. I've seen what fear like this does to people who wait too long to act. I've buried soldiers who hesitated because something looked less dangerous than it turned out to be. We move at dawn. Ren sat near the back of the hall, her fists clenched tightly in her lap, feeling the weight of every eye that occasionally flicked toward her, some with pity, some with something closer to blame. Nobody asked her opinion directly. Nobody seemed to think a child's word could outweigh 40 years of fear passed down from parent to child, generation after generation. That night, Holt sat with her at the kitchen table, his expression tired in a way she had rarely seen. I know you believe what you're telling me, he said gently. I even believe that you believe it. But I can't risk this settlement on the word of a child, Ren. I have to protect everyone here, including you. Even if you're wrong, she asked quietly. Holt did not have an answer for that. He only reached over and squeezed her hand before telling her firmly to stay inside that night, that the doors would be locked, that under no circumstances was she to leave the house before morning. Ren nodded and said nothing more, and Holt, exhausted from the day's events, believed the conversation was finally over. It was not. Long after the house had gone quiet and her parents' breathing had settled into the slow rhythm of sleep, Ren slipped out of her window with the same careful silence she had used 100 times before to sneak toward the crater. The night air was cold and sharp against her skin, and somewhere in the distance she could already hear the low murmur of Bram's soldiers preparing their equipment for the morning's assault, torches and weapon lights flickering like distant fireflies at the edge of the settlement. She ran faster than she ever had before, her small legs burning as she scrambled over the familiar rocks, half expecting to find the crater already surrounded. It was empty, save for the dragon, curled in its usual spot, eyes snapping open the moment her footsteps hit loose stone. You should not be here, it said immediately, rising slightly, wings shifting with unusual urgency. They're coming at dawn, Ren gasped out, barely able to catch her breath. A whole group of them. Soldiers, weapons, everything. You have to leave. Please, you have to go somewhere they can't find you. The dragon went very still, its eyes moving toward the horizon where the faintest hint of gray light was beginning to touch the edge of the sky. For a long moment, it said nothing, and Ren feared it might simply refuse, too tired or too resigned to its fate to run. Not without knowing you are safe first. It finally said, lowering its head toward her with a gentleness that seemed impossible for something so large. I'll be fine, Ren insisted. You need to go? Now, before it's too late. But even as she said it, the first distant shout rang out across the crater's rim, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots against stone, and Ren realized, with a sinking feeling in her chest, that it already was. The first shot cracked through the early morning air before Ren could even turn around, striking the rock face just above the dragon's head and sending a shower of dust and stone raining down into the crater. She screamed without meaning to, throwing her arms up on instinct, and in that same instant felt herself being pulled backward, not by a soldier's hand, but by something far larger and warmer wrapping carefully around her small frame. The dragon had moved faster than she thought possible for something its size, curling its body protectively around her just as a second shot rang out, this one striking its shoulder with a sound like thunder cracking too close. It did not roar. It did not lash out. It simply held its position, wings spread wide, forming a barrier of scale and muscle between Ren and the soldiers now pouring over the crater's edge. Hold your fire. Bram's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding, though his own eyes widened in confusion at the sight in front of him. The creature he had been sent to destroy, the monster blamed for decades of devastation, was curled protectively around a child instead of tearing through the soldiers surrounding it. More shots rang out anyway, fired by soldiers too frightened or too committed to their orders to stop immediately, each one striking against the dragon's back and wings. It flinched with every impact, a low-pained sound escaping its throat, but it did not move away from Ren, not even an inch, no matter how much the injuries clearly hurt. Stop! Ren screamed, her voice cracking as she struggled against the protective curl of the dragon's body, trying to make herself visible to the soldiers above. He's not attacking. Look at him. He's not attacking anyone. Holt arrived moments later, having run the entire distance from the settlement the second he discovered Ren's empty bed, his chest heaving as he scrambled down into the crater and froze at the sight before him. Dana was close behind, breathless, her eyes scanning the scene with the same sharp focus she gave to her old dusty records, except now the evidence was standing right in front of her, undeniable and impossible to misread. Bram, hold your soldiers, Holt shouted, his voice raw with a mixture of fear and dawning horror. That's my daughter down there. The gunfire slowed and then stopped entirely, though the soldiers remained tense, weapons still raised, uncertain what to make of a scene that contradicted everything they had been told to expect. The dragon slowly unfurled its wings, revealing Rin unharmed but shaking, tears streaking down her dirt-covered face, standing beside a creature now bleeding from multiple wounds along its back and shoulder. "He protected me," Rin said, her voice barely audible but carrying clearly through the sudden silence of the crater. "The whole time. He protected me." Bram lowered his weapon slowly, his jaw tight, staring at the dragon with an expression that seemed to war between decades of training and the plain, undeniable truth in front of him. "Explain," he said finally, his voice quieter now, directed at the creature itself rather than anyone else present. The dragon lifted its head slowly, wincing with the movement, blood dripping from a wound along its shoulder onto the scorched earth below. When it spoke, its voice was strained but steady, each word chosen with obvious effort. "Long ago," it began, "creatures like me were used. Weapons, built and controlled by those who came before your people settled here. Forced into wars we did not choose. When the ones who controlled us finally left this world, some of us stayed behind, too broken, too changed to return to whatever we once were." It paused, breathing heavily, before continuing. "The attacks your records blame on me were not all mine. Some were mine, in those early years, before I understood what I had become. Most were not. I have spent decades trying only to survive, alone, far from anyone I might accidentally harm." "Then why stay so close to us at all?" Dana asked carefully, stepping forward with the same quiet curiosity she had shown poring over old reports late into the night. The dragon's eyes moved toward Rin, softening in a way that left no room for doubt. "Because for the first time in a very long while, someone did not run from me. Someone spoke to me as though I were more than the stories say." Holt looked between his daughter and the wounded creature curled protectively nearby, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile years of fear against the scene playing out in front of him. Slowly, he lowered his own weapon, the tension in his shoulders finally beginning to ease. "We need to treat those wounds," Dana said firmly, already moving toward her medical bag without waiting for permission, treating the moment with the same practical urgency she gave to any injured creature, monster or not. Bram remained still for a long moment, weapon lowered but not yet holstered, staring at the dragon with an expression Ren could not quite read. Finally, he exhaled slowly and holstered his weapon completely, shaking his head as though shaking off years of certainty all at once. "In all my years," he said quietly, mostly to himself, "I've never seen a monster shield a child instead of using her as a shield." He looked toward Holt. "Whatever this is, it's not what we came here for." As the soldiers slowly lowered their weapons and Dana began carefully examining the dragon's wounds, Rin remained close by its side, her small hand resting gently against its scarred scales, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of its breathing beneath her palm. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain now, and so, finally, did everyone else standing in that crater. The monster the stories warned them about had never truly existed at all. The settlement's small medical shelter had never been built to treat something as large as a dragon, so instead the work happened outdoors, under a canopy of stretched canvas rigged up by soldiers who, only hours earlier, had been prepared to end its life instead of save it. Dana moved carefully between wounds, cleaning and wrapping what she could, while Rin sat close by, refusing every gentle suggestion from her parents that she go home and rest. "He wouldn't leave me," she said stubbornly, each time someone tried to coax her away. "I'm not leaving him either." The dragon, weak from blood loss but stable, watched her with quiet gratitude through half-closed eyes, occasionally letting out that same low rumbling sound she had learned, over the weeks, to recognize as something close to contentment. It no longer bothered hiding that sound around the others. There no longer seemed to be a reason to. Word of what happened in the crater spread through the settlement almost as quickly as the original fear once had, though this time the story carried something different with it. People who had spent years telling their children to stay far from the wasteland now found themselves standing at a careful distance, watching a wounded creature being tended to with the same care given to any injured neighbor. Not everyone changed their minds immediately. Fear built over decades did not disappear in a single morning, no matter how clear the evidence seemed. Some families kept their distance for weeks, whispering doubts, wondering if the whole scene had been some kind of trick. But slowly, day by day, As the dragon healed and remained exactly as gentle as it had been from the very start, even the most stubborn doubts began to soften. Dana's research, once dismissed as an interesting theory buried in old paperwork, suddenly became something worth taking seriously. She spent the following weeks compiling everything she had found, cross-referencing old attack reports with newly gathered accounts from nearby colonies, slowly building a clearer picture of exactly which incidents belonged to which creatures over the decades. It was slow, careful work, the kind that did not offer dramatic answers overnight, but piece by piece, it began correcting years of misplaced blame. Bram stayed longer than his original orders required, requesting an extension from his command once he saw enough with his own eyes to question everything he had been sent to accomplish. He spent hours near the dragon during its recovery, initially out of professional caution, but eventually out of something closer to genuine respect. "I've hunted a lot of dangerous things in my life," he admitted to Holt one evening, watching Ren fall asleep against the dragon's side while it rested nearby, careful even in sleep not to shift too suddenly. "Never once has any of them protected the very thing I was trying to save." Holt, who had spent the first days after the incident wrestling with guilt over how close he had come to losing everything, found himself slowly warming to the presence he had once feared more than anything else in the world. It was Ren, more than anyone, who helped bridge that final gap, insisting her father sit with them one quiet afternoon, guiding his hand gently toward the dragon's scales the way she once had, showing him there was truly nothing to fear. The dragon remained still and patient through the entire exchange, allowing Holt's cautious touch without flinching, without any sign of the danger everyone had once believed defined it completely. "Thank you," Holt said quietly, his voice thick with an emotion he did not fully know how to name. "For protecting her. For everything." The dragon's eyes softened in that familiar way Ren had come to recognize so well. "Thank you," it replied, its voice steadier now than it had been in a very long time, "for finally listening." Months passed, and the crater at the edge of the settlement slowly transformed from a place of fear into something else entirely. New grass grew where scorched earth had once stretched for years without recovery. Children who once dared each other to sneak close to the fence line now visited openly, drawn by curiosity rather than fear, always accompanied by an adult, always careful, but no longer terrified. The dragon took to watching over the settlement in its own quiet way, resting near the fields during the day, occasionally driving off wild predators that wandered too close to the crops at night. It never asked for anything in return, content simply to remain nearby, no longer isolated, no longer alone. Ren grew older through those seasons, though she never stopped visiting the crater whenever she could, bringing food less out of necessity now and more out of habit, out of friendship that had only grown stronger with time. Travelers passing through the region occasionally still whispered the old stories, warning newcomers about the monster said to live near this settlement, and each time, the settlement's own people would simply smile and offer to show them the truth for themselves. On one particular afternoon, as a group of nervous travelers approached the edge of the settlement, weapons half raised out of old habit, they found instead a scene that stopped them entirely. A massive dragon lay peacefully in the afternoon sun, wings relaxed, eyes half closed, while a young woman sat comfortably against its side, laughing at something one of the settlement's children had said nearby. The travelers lowered their weapons slowly, exchanging uncertain glances, unable to reconcile the stories they had heard with the gentle scene in front of them. Ren looked up, noticing their hesitation, and offered them the same simple explanation she had given so many times before. "He's not what the stories say," she said, smiling as the dragon opened one eye lazily toward the newcomers, utterly unbothered by their presence. "He never was."